Well, good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And all right, basically, last time we ended up talking about the early 70s, and we have a lot of things going on. We have the youth culture, feminism, there's different minority groups fighting for equality and stuff. And that's the big idea with the early 70s is that it's really a time in which it's very tense in a lot of ways. I think you saw how Nixon kind of was a guy who was playing to that divisiveness a little bit in America, the young versus the old, the cool versus the not cool, and all of that. And then we ended off talking about abortion a little bit with the Roe versus Wade case, and just a few comments about that. So, yeah, 1972, we have the abortion controversy here, and one thing about this is it's not about abortion, okay? Don't get excited. It's not about abortion. It's about privacy. And does a woman have the right to have the privacy to do with her body whatever she's going to do, like with her body, you know? And that's what's confusing for a lot of students. Like they think the case is mainly about abortion, but it's really more about confidentiality and privacy. Because if you look at the ruling, if you ever did, of course you will all do that tonight as you go home. The Supreme Court justices in a 7-2 ruling declared that, you know, for a woman to do that, that's between her and her, doctor. And so, yes, it does legalize abortion in the United States, basically, but it's more about privacy. The whole idea that a woman can do that. Now, do women want to have abortions? I don't think so. But you know, there's circumstances, right? When we talk about all that kind of stuff, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. So just remember, it's again, I think I might have said this already. It's about privacy. Yeah, it is. Also, other things happening in the early 70s. Earth Day. I believe we just celebrated Earth Day. There's an environmental movement going on, and this all starts in the early 60s with a very famous book that you've never read called Silent Spring. It's by a biologist named Rachel Carson, and Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, is basically about the terror of DDT use and pesticide use in America. And basically what she was saying is that if we continue to farm our food supply and pump it full of, pesticides and chemicals, what will eventually happen is the dissolution and death of society, because in her words, you would have a silent spring, like where the bees would be destroyed, and you need bees to pollinate stuff, right? Like, in other words, this is the book that kind of sparks the environmental movement, and the environmental movement today is so important. I mean, we've become a society where the word green is really awesome, right? Are you green? I'm green. Are you solar? I'm solar. And that's what this is all about. So when she writes the book, after it is read and stuff, by 1969 you have another landmark event, and that is when the astronauts walk on the moon, and all of a sudden, for the first time in history, people can see the Earth, like from outer space, from the moon. And that raises a level of environmental awareness, because people for the first time see how beautiful our planet is. And what's interesting is that all of this stuff that's happening at the same time, it raises America's conscious level about how to deal with environmental problems. And in the early 1970s, you have a slew of pieces of legislation, such as the environmental, like the Clean Air Act, for example, 1972. Clean Air Act is basically just, well, it's about clean air. It sets limits for what is dirty air and what is clean, what are called particulate levels in the atmosphere. The Environmental Protection Agency is created by Richard Nixon as a result of this environmental movement. Okay, and the EPA basically makes sure that there are certain regulations that are followed when it comes to, waste, toxic dumping. If you have, for example, water systems in cities, what's left over after the sewer takes care of everything. What can you do with that waste? That kind of stuff. And so another thing that happens is they passed the Clean Water Act in 1972 as well. The Clean Water Act simply just sets federal guidelines for what is clean water. Is it clean water if you dig a well and you take it right out of the ground and don't add chemicals to it that kill organisms and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different aspects to this, a lot of environmentalism going on in the early 70s. And if you guys want to go solar, just let me know. I can hook you up with $1,000 and I get $1,000. No, seriously. Oh, I'm sorry. These are some of the landmark things that were passed that I was just talking about. But basically, what's kind of funny about this environmentalism movement is it kind of shows you that it doesn't matter what party is in power. If people are going to do something like this, it comes from the ground up. Remember how the civil rights movement was a grassroots movement? That's what this is, because Richard Nixon was a Republican, and Republicans aren't known for expanding government. But a lot of people, historians, think that President Nixon was actually more of a liberal in a lot of ways because of expanding the government and creating agencies such as this, especially to protect the environment. But I don't think he got elected going, I'm going to create a new government agency to protect the environment, because that's not what Republicans do. Republicans are interested in giving back taxpayers the money and not expanding government. So when Nixon does this, this kind of makes him seem a little bit more, quote unquote, liberal, than others. And so that's kind of cool, I guess. Again, environmentalism beginning and starting. And we're still environmentally friendly. Did you guys know the city of Fresno, one of the great cities in terms of actual amount of trash recycled? Yes. We're in the top 10 in the United States. That's one thing to be proud of. Well, we can't fix our air because everybody drives. That's a problem. You gotta stop driving, and then maybe we'll stop eating meat. And that's popular around here. I know. You're preaching to the choir here. I understand. So let's get to the politics. So that's more of the social and cultural stuff. Let's get to the politics and the economics. And in Nixon's time, you have the Cold War, which is going on, and we're going to see what President Nixon's goals are in terms of foreign policy, because those are very important. Of course, you've got the great Watergate scandal, and I'm going to go in depth on that from just the stuff that I know and things like that. So, okay, first off, let's start out with the foreign policy. This is a very famous picture. This is simply President Nixon's trip to China. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit later. But first of all, the big foreign policy issue when he's elected is no. Saudi Arabia, no. ISIS, no. Vietnam. And so the big thing for Nixon is to do what he promised to do when he was elected in 1968. Bring the war to an end in an honorable way to not make it look like we're losing. He calls it peace with honor. Now Nixon, in doing this, discusses this with his foreign policy team, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. It's like, how do we do this? How do we get out of Vietnam without making it look like we basically put our heads between our legs and ran away like a bunch of sissies? Because that's what we're really going to do, but we don't want to make it look like that, because if we make it look like that, then the Soviets are going to think we're weak, right? But that's what President Nixon's all about. And so his foreign policy team comes up with this whole idea called Vietnamization. And there's his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. Vietnamization means this: turning the responsibility of fighting the war in Vietnam to the South Vietnamese. Kind of like giving them the keys to the car and saying, you guys drive now, okay? We're getting out, you guys take over. Okay. Pluses and minuses to this policy. Pluses. Okay? If it works, America is going to look like geniuses because we're going to save American lives, right? And be able to get out of the war. And hopefully, if it works, the South Vietnamese forces will fend off the communists. Okay? Therefore, President Nixon's public approval ratings will go up, and we'll bring the troops home. And that's what everyone wants. And again, that's why he was elected, basically. Not for any other reason, really. But on the negative side, if it doesn't work, what could possibly happen? I ask you, the students, what could possibly happen in South Vietnam if things go really not according to plan? Yes, sir. Oh, no, the South would fall to communism, yes.
It goes to South and then would expand all the way 1,000 times.
Domino theory, right? Exactly right. The communist threat could, move into neighboring countries, and this could really backfire. But in Nixon's mind and in Kissinger's mind, this seemed to be the best chance for peace. Okay? Gradually withdrawing American forces, handing over the responsibilities of the war to the South Vietnamese. Again, huge risks involved, not easy to do. But in order to make good on your campaign promises, if you're President Nixon, that's what you got to do. Ironically, the exact opposite happened the first year President Nixon was actually in office. Okay? I want to talk about the escalation of the war. So, while they're talking about Vietnamization, and they started to do that by 1969, 1970, started to bring gradual numbers of troops home. At the same time, the United States was attempting to bomb nearby Cambodia, which is right next to Vietnam. If you look at a map, I don't have a map up here, but it's right next to it. And there's this series of tunnels called, does anyone know what they're called? That's right, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Okay, you're like, what? Okay. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is named after the North Vietnamese communist leader Ho Chi Minh, and that is how the goods are being transported to the South. And so what President Nixon does secretly is he tries to bomb them so that the South Vietnamese can succeed at defending their country, okay? Because that's the way that they've been able to, the communists have been able to basically hang in this war, They're transporting stuff in the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Ho Chi Minh Trail